Welcome back to the Leeds Rhinos Podcast, episode 38. It's a Thursday, which means it's our Q&A edition, and I'm delighted to be joined by Chief Executive of Oxen, our brilliant partners, Lee Jenkinson. We'll be hearing from Lee talking about all things kit and boot related these days, the great work Oxen are doing in that particular market, and find out how that's come about. We'll also be answering your questions you've sent in about all things Leeds Rhinos kit related, some great questions, and real informative answers coming up from Lee to let you know where that's from. Thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Daly, Head of Media and PR at Leeds Rhinos. Please remember to subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest podcasts from Leeds Rhinos. We've got loads coming out at the moment, and if you subscribe it, make sure you get that notification straight away so you don't miss out on any of the news coming out of the Leeds Rhinos. Remember to give us a 5-star review so we can continue to climb those podcast charts and spread the word about all things Leeds Rhinos and Rugby League related. Lee, great to have you here. Should really give you a full title, 2015 Clubman of the Year, when of course you worked at Leeds Rhinos before taking over the rugby merchandise empire that is Oxen. Great to have you here. Looking forward to answering some of these questions.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Phil. It's obviously always great to be back in Leeds and obviously living off that title still nearly 10 years later. So good.
Yeah, really good. There's plenty of this sport who live off a good season. Just before we get into the questions from the fans, just give us a bit of background on yourself. I mentioned there you worked at the Rhinos very successfully over a period there, but you were at Hull before that. Give the fans a bit of an insight into your journey to this point.
Yeah, so I guess my whole career has pretty much been in the industry. Started at Hull FC when I was 16, part-time role, worked my way up there, worked for 10, 11 years really successfully there, left as a director, came to the Rhinos for 3 years, which was, 3 of the best years that I've ever had. Nothing could go wrong in them years. The club was winning everything. Leeds never lost a Challenge Cup game while I was employed here, which was obviously fantastic. And then while I was here, I pretty much envisaged probably seeing my career out here, which was crazy to think at such a young age, and I was really enjoying it. But then my business partner, as it is now, approached me with an opportunity to say, I think I want to do this and I want you to come and run it. Are you interested? And it was a great opportunity that I couldn't turn down. I'd worked in a particular sector within the industry, which was, operations and merchandise for my time at the clubs. And I felt there was a way to try and change it from the inside. So it was an opportunity I grasped. I didn't know how long I'd last there for, but then I've been there for nearly 10 years now as well. So yeah, it's been an eventful journey.
Fantastic. I remember actually being on your interview when you came to join us from Hull, and that was a good decision, and it's formed into a partnership now that's really benefits both parties. Well, from an Oxen point of view, how does it work with the Rhinos you in terms of that partnership?
Yeah, look, it's a fantastic partnership, and just for clarity, there was no corner given by Rob when it came to negotiating on the contract. We actually tendered for it twice before we got it on the third time. But look, it was fantastic for us, knowing what the club could achieve, having spent a good few years here, and looking at where the club was with the current brand at the time and what the aspirations was. We felt that it was a great fit for both parties. Obviously, it works a little bit differently here than it does at some of our other clubs, because whilst we are Oxen, we also have the retail arm of the business with Elite Pro Sports as well. And the partnership that we work with the Rhinos sees us look after everything. So the store that you see at Headingley, the e-commerce platform, whilst, designing and manufacturing all the merchandise as well. But it's fantastic collaborative partnership. It's not just run by us. We do everything, as hand in hand with the club. And I think it's a partnership which has obviously lasted for 4 or 5 years so far, has got, another 4 or 5 years to go. But I hope that's a partnership that lasts long beyond that, because it's one that I feel works for everybody.
I think something that's really unique about you guys is you get rugby league. You are a company that has rugby league at its core. Yeah. You look at your other clubs you're involved in Super League, and I know you've got big plans over in Australia as well. But I think that's a really thing we should celebrate. That whilst there are other brands involved in the sport, actually you guys at Oxen, you get rugby league. You get rugby league supporters. You understand what it is that makes our game so special.
Yeah, definitely. And look, both me and my business partner Shane have been ingrained in the sport from being a young age, both watching, playing, and then administratively. So we do understand the sport and we do understand the people. I think the unique point of difference we have is that we're very much a partner first business. It's not brand first. And I understand from a fan's perspective, because I am one and I have been one, and looking from afar at the industry before I got really involved, is you wonder why certain brands are involved in the sport. And there's a lot of conversation as we would like this brand, we would like that brand, but I think the issue becomes is, to your point, is that they don't really want to be ingrained in the sport and they don't know the sport. Well, we're the opposite. We jump in with 2 feet, and knowing the sport as we do, trying to double down on it a little bit more now with obviously the footwear and become that true head-to-toe rugby supplier is something that we're really passionate about.
Fantastic stuff. We'll get into some of the questions, and one of the we got there is why not collaborate with third-party brands? During your time at the Rhinos, we did that, didn't we? We had Superdry for a range there, and I know it's something that you're always open to working with companies if it's a right fit for you and for the clubs.
Yeah, definitely, and it re-emphasises that partner first mentality. Is that if there was a 3-way partnership to do with someone that, for this instance with Leeds, that would work for all parties, then we embrace everything, as we did with the Superdry project when I was here. That was fantastic, and the only reason that stopped was because of Superdry, not because of anything that we would want to do as a club, because I was employed by the Rhinos at the time. So we're always looking for new opportunities, and our network is getting vast on in both hemispheres now, and we're always having conversations with other brands, other partners. There's a misconception that every brand's at each other's head, and it's the opposite. Everyone's pretty good mates, if I'm honest. Business is business, but we all get along, and we're often looking for collaborations. We've got one going in one of the other sports that we work in at the minute, which will be significant to launch that, which will launch later this year.
Fantastic stuff, and I know from speaking to you guys how innovative you are with things. So we've got a couple of questions here. They're pretty much related, so we'll put them all together. So one question, and probably best to have Rob Oates here to answer this one with you. Can a kit be released with less sponsors, maybe a main shirt sponsor and a sleeve? And then someone asks, full blackout kit, no silly patterns, just black. Be the best-selling kit you've ever seen. A couple of questions there around sponsors, and now obviously that's a club decision rather than you guys, and I can promise you we have plenty of discussions about sponsorship placement, things like that. But as you said there earlier about the uniqueness of rugby league and how the ecosystem and the money needs to turn around in rugby league, sponsors are an integral part of the game being able to go forward and being able to afford players and going things.
Yeah,
it is part of it, but getting that right and working with partners. I know you, through Rob, work very closely with our partners to make sure that we really make that brand look as strong as possible on the kit.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, the money involved, what these corporate partners are putting in is significant in terms of keeping clubs running day to day. And I'm fortunate that I've seen it from both perspectives. I've seen it from the side working in the club and trying to bring sponsors into the club, and now at the opposite side of the desk where you're trying to make the sponsors fit on the shirt. And, one of the biggest things that gets leveled at kit brands consistently is they haven't really thought about the integration of the sponsor on the shirt. And I can assure you that is all we think about, is how we best integrate it. But at the end of the day, these are these people's brands, and they're passionate about the brand, they're passionate about the club that they're sponsoring, and they want to see their brand in all its glory. So, we have to try and make it work as best as we can. It's not always ideal for the club, for us, sometimes not ideal for the sponsor, but I think building the relationships with the sponsors really helps. And if you look at the amount of limited edition shirts for the M&D Association that we've done with the club, and the sponsors have always been fantastic to go that, we will make sure that we change to being fitting with a jersey of that nature. So I understand the frustrations of the fans, and it is a frustration of brands and clubs at times, but at the end of the day, we don't have a lengthy list of corporate sponsors looking to pump money into the sport. So I think when they're in, we should embrace it.
Absolutely. It's interesting, those blackout kits, because we've seen a few in different sports. Arsenal have done one quite regularly, but it's a white kit, isn't it, they have? And Brisbane Broncos recently produced that blackout kit. And I think if you've got a one-off cause that it celebrates, that your sponsors can buy into and understand, things like that, it can work. But as a season long one of your kits, I mean, if it was my brand, I'm telling you, I'm not having it blacked out. I've paid all that money. I want people to see my brand.
Yeah. No, look, we maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we did one with one of our football teams, where it was a blackout kit, and it was very much along the same lines of what the Broncos did recently. And working with the sponsors to be able to facilitate that was a lengthy process. They were happy to do it for one game. They wouldn't do it for any more. And so I completely understand their perspective on that.
And talking, mentioned there about the Broncos and all things NRL, we had a couple of questions in regarding what's coming up in February next year. One from on Instagram there, both asking similar questions. Are there special Vegas? Is there going to be a special Vegas strip coming out soon? And are there special Vegas merchandise that will be available? Well, before you answer that, I know you are a big fan of the Vegas concept. You've been there last 2 years?
Just last year.
Just last year.
Sorry.
This year, gone the wing and one. But you've got great contacts in the NRL who are involved in that. You're having conversations with them guys. about that. I mean, before we get on to any kit, I mean, it's going to be a great occasion because two Oxen teams facing off against us against Hull. It's happy days in the States for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, going this year was without doubt the best 7 days I've had in sport. Rugby league's a great sport at the best of times. Magic Weekend I've always been a fan of. Now, obviously, you go to Vegas and it's amplified by 100,000 times. And yeah, the 7 days there were fantastic. Great people in and around it. I think anyone who hasn't booked yet, I'd certainly recommend going. It's a once in a lifetime experience. Fantastic for us this year to have two Oxen teams, and it was almost a bit of a premonition because at the game last year I was sat with Craig Franklin, who's the chief operating officer at Hull KR, and we literally sat there and the exact words was, "Wouldn't this be interesting if it was Hull KR and Leeds next year?" And then lo and behold, it's Hull KR and Leeds this year. So yeah, look, we're really excited about it. I think the event is going to be great. I think the NRL do a great job. Looking at how spread out rugby league is across the Vegas Strip is phenomenal to see. And it's great to be walking down the Strip and see everything from a Brisbane jersey to a Batley jersey and everything in between. To answer that question, yeah, there will be Vegas product. We started working on it as soon as the announcement was made. We'll probably drop a small amount in August this year ahead of the Hull KR Leeds game with further ranges and bits to drop as we progress nearer to the time. I'm fortunately going to Australia on Monday, and I'm sitting down with the NRL again next Friday where we're discussing all things Vegas. And we've got a unique viewpoint this year because obviously working with yourselves in Hull KR, it's great for the NRL because they're only dealing with one partner.
Yeah, and for those, I mean, we've spoken before on the Q&A podcast, but just to give an appreciation how big an organisation it is just around the Vegas thing. I mean, the NRL have got some strict guidelines around that amount of times we can use the official logo and things like that. Yeah. So there are a lot of loopholes to get through and things you need to satisfy around that, but it's great that we're already having those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a completely different beast, and it's a different beast from everything from the way you can manufacture to what logos you can use to what can actually be sold in Las Vegas itself. But again, we were in a fortunate position that we already had the relationship with the NRL for everything that we've got going on in Australia, so it's made this process a little bit smoother. But yeah, that said, it's going to be fantastic. Well, it's going to be fantastic to see both clubs out there, and we'll take a distinct amount of pride with seeing Oxen not only on both teams but on the match officials as well.
Yeah, don't worry. Rest assured, if you've got an empty bag that you take to Vegas, Lee and his guys can fill it up with Vegas gear before we go. You won't need to bring any other clothes other than Vegas specific gear for that week, and buy it before you go, because then we avoid the old tariffs from Donald on that one. It's a question here about how kits get designed and the time scale that involves there. Gary asked what's the release date for next year's kit. We've also got about how long does it take to design and come up with ideas for kits. What's the sort of time scale on that when you're producing those kits?
Yeah, so it's a real lengthy process, and as I mentioned earlier, with the Rhinos, everything's done in collaboration with the club. We would probably start that process internally about October, November so this year we'll start in October, November for 2027. We'll have some internal design meetings, come up with some concepts, then inevitably sit with the key stakeholders at the club round about first, second week of November, which is weird because you're just launching all this merchandise, but then you're moving on to the next one, and we'll do a brainstorm. We'll go, this is what we're thinking. What are you thinking? Collaborate the ideas, and then probably sit down with you guys again December wise. We like to try and get a real steer for what it'll look like prior to Christmas, so that when we come back in January we can start moving it forward from storyboard to actual concept. We would usually then try and get something sampled by about the start of February, with the order going in round about the end of March, and then that allows for us to be flexible with the delivery. I think one of the things that we did successfully when I was here at the Rhinos was we kind of changed the retail landscape a little bit from a club perspective. At that point, everybody was leaving their next season launches till November and December, and then trying to cram everything into a really short, basically a 45, 50-day window before Christmas. Whereas what we did here was we started moving it forward because Matt Adams, who's obviously still at the club, we did a big bit of marketing research to show that Christmas shopping starts in September. And that was 10 years ago, so it's probably started even earlier now. And the idea was to try and give customers the opportunity to try and spread the purchases out if they need to. So the reason we do the shirt timelines like that now is that, should the club make Old Trafford, we'd be in a position to go on sale with the following season shirt. And I understand that some people will say, well, we are playing in this year's shirt. It shouldn't be going on sale with next year's shirt, which I totally understand. But at that time of year, we'd have little to few shirts left anyway, and you couldn't manufacture any in the time that it takes between the semi and the grand final. And the way that was really successful was obviously our first year in situ here, where the club played in the Challenge Cup final behind closed doors. The war actually were the next year's shirt, and still over the last 10 years, including the treble in 2015, that shirt's the biggest selling Rhinos home shirt of the last 10 years. So there's method in the madness, but it is a lengthy process, and it's not always an exact science because you've got to throw sponsor sign off into that mix as well, along with anything else that's going on. League structure was one the other year. So yeah, it's a lengthy process, but it's an enjoyable process as well.
Yeah. And we talked about that time scale there. So if you imagine the amount of sponsors that are on the shirt, those guys have got to be committed 2 years in advance that's the logo they want there because it's going to start getting produced. It's a real logistical challenge to get all that done. You mentioned shirts there. Obviously, that one. So a couple of questions here one from Abigail, one from Harrison. What's your favourite shirt design you've made? We'll start with give us a Rhinos one, and then one, maybe another one from one that you've been involved with outside the Rhinos.
Yeah, I think that one, the 2021 home shirt, would be the right for a few reasons. Really, is one, it was the first Oxen shirt that we'd produce for the club. Secondly, it was a bit of a risk because it looked different to what the last 20 Rhinos shirts would have looked like. But thirdly, there's a funny story behind it as well. Is like we had at Oxen, we had a particular idea about what we wanted the shirt to look like for our first season, and I still remember bringing the sample in and showing Oatsy it, and I obviously can't explain exactly what he said, but he left me under no illusion that he didn't like the shirt. So it was kind of back to the drawing board for us, and it was actually a conversation me and you had in the cafe bar downstairs when I was going on about this, and you happened to make a reference to me about you've got this idea, and we took that idea and we amplified it, and that's what created the shirt. So yeah, I look back on that with pride. It was fantastic. Obviously, it was a shame that none of us could go to Wembley and watch the club winning it, but it's still probably my favourite Rhino shirt.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And other than Rhinos?
I think there's been a few. Obviously, we're taking, you said earlier about being, a rugby specialist brand. We're taking an immense amount of pride in the England shirts. We love looking after the national team and what that signifies. The move to navy was obviously deemed as controversial, but again, the data's there. The sales were fantastic, and that again was, the best-selling England shirt today. So that was a one that I really liked. But I think the probably one outside of this one, which for the reasons which I'll allude to, was the one we did for the Mossy Masoy testimonial for the Combined Nation All-Stars, because for a few reasons, obviously he suffered that horrific injury not that long before, and we wanted to try and do something and raise some money. And we sat down with Mossy, we looked at his tattoo, we digitised his tattoo, put it over the kit, and it was a really special jersey. And I love the Combined Nations All-Stars bit, but I was fortunate to have a relationship with Tim Sheens, who was the coach, and Carl Hall, who was the manager, and they invited me into the camp the night before the game for the jersey presentation. I wasn't expecting it, but then I got presented with a jersey myself, which was for Oxen. It still hangs up in our office. It was a real nice touch, and I think for everything that jersey signifies and what it raised was great. Yeah. But obviously that leads into all the shirts that we've done for the MND Association as well, which have been particular favourites for different reasons.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can personally say, you personally, Lee, but your guys, when we design those M&D shirts and we come up with ideas and we're trying to think the way our ideas then transform into a shirt that you see them, don't you? If you're here on a game day, see people, particularly in last year's shirt, but this year's shirt's been really popular with fans. And we've got a comment here from someone saying how much they've enjoyed this year's shirt, M&D shirt, and it raises a phenomenal amount of money. I mean, we've talked about, what should we do this year? Does it need a year off or whatever? And when you look at the amount of money it raises and the good that does, how can you not do it again? It just and people enjoy it and people look forward to it. It's almost become an annual event now, isn't it? That people going, well, when's the M&D shirt coming out? And it's like going, oh, we didn't think people would want them this year or whatever. And I think
it's become something that'll be, forever and a day ingrained in the Rhinos calendar. And look, it's something we're really passionate about being involved with. Work closely with the MND Association, obviously work with yourself and Kevin in his challenges each year, so it's obviously a cause very close to our heart because of Rob Lindsay and the kids, and we really love working on them concepts. And I think to your point there is, the MND Association articulated this to us and this was quite early on in the process of, please don't stop doing it, because in their words, we're a vehicle, we're a vehicle to help people celebrate, to help people people, raise money. And yeah, look, it's a great concept that we love working on.
We've got that one there about making it, and people ask about next year's kit. Obviously, you give the time scale there on what we'll be looking forward to on that. Someone asked, can we stop wearing the black kit? Well, someone asked for a blackout kit, so we can't. I think that's a very good point there. You can't please all the people all the time. Okay, I mean, there's this theory, isn't there, when we launch a kit, whether it's a traditional design or whether it's something new, people say, oh, let's have something new, or why this isn't a Leeds shirt and things like that. It must be so hard to walk that fine line, because you can't just produce the same Leeds jersey every year.
Yeah,
because people will go, well, there's nothing new there.
No, it is really difficult, and it's even more difficult for our design team, who do a fantastic job. But especially when we've got long-term relationships with brands like we have here, with clubs like the Rhinos, it's difficult to reinvent the wheel year upon year, and it's often a misconception, because you look at the shirt this year, which is as traditional as Leeds shirt as they come, and the feedback was absolutely fantastic. But it's not sold to levels of previous year where the shirt's been a little bit less like a home shirt. We've got a bit of backed by data in terms of the theory. We think that the direction of home shirts are going, because it's quite common across the board. You look at like what a lot of clubs have done with their home shirts this year. If you look at Hull KI, if you look at Cass, they retain the traditional values of a shirt, but they're not like something that'll be in someone's wardrobe from the last 10 or 15 years. So it's a difficult one, because it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And like you said, there's a fine line. I think our job with yourself and the club is to try and keep reinvigorating that year upon year. So it gives something that the club are proud of. It gives something that the fans can recognise the heritage, but it also gives something that looks a little bit different and encourages people to purchase that shirt as well.
On a similar note, question here about sizes, and someone talked about the sizes that the Oxen have the shirts in and the merchandise in. I mean, what is in terms of how that operates and what a standard size is, because presumably all around the world standards are very different.
Yeah.
How does that work in terms of the year?
Yeah, so look, we try and tweak sizes based on fan feedback consistently, the same way as what we do with players on the players' apparel. And it's really difficult because, one person, as an example, will fit a medium really nicely, another person won't. And when you have you could have two very different sized people fitting in a medium shirt. So we try and tweak them as often as we can. We try and make them as fit to what we feel the general fan is. But that said, it's really difficult to please everyone, because, pure example, I got 2 dress shirts from one company this morning. One fit me fine and one didn't. And it's obviously because they've come from different manufacturing sources. We don't have that, but it's not an exact science of going, there's a universal size guide which fits everyone, because there isn't. So we try and make it as comfortable for people as we can, but we understand that it's difficult at times.
And you have a great returns policy as well.
Yeah, of course.
So someone can, if it doesn't fit, get the next size up, and then you're happy, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. And talking of sizes, a question about women's kit, women's training range and those sizes, but also our women's shirt. I think it's fantastic that we do our replica women's shirt. Obviously, they've got different sponsors from the first team, and we have that on sale in the shops. That doesn't come out at the same time as the men's shirt, but presumably that's on the club in terms of our sponsors marks that go on there?
Yeah, purely just sponsor marks. Obviously, the women's season starts a little bit later, so the sponsors naturally come a little bit later on in the cycle. So that's the only reason why there's a different launch for the women's shirts to the men's. And
talking to women, and moving us neatly on to the next thing I want to chat to you about, a question about boot sizes for women. So I know Oxen now, we'll talk about this in a bit. You've got into the boot market and specifically looking at a boot for rugby players. But we were talking earlier on that the women's sizes on the boot is something you're looking at, but it's a long process to try and resolve those issues.
Yeah, and footwear is a real complicated. There's a reason a lot of brands don't go into footwear, is because of how complicated it is, how long a time it takes to do it, and how costly it is. We're fortunate to have some fantastic female athletes that we work with, and we've been going through a process with them on women's leisure wear and women's gym apparel for probably the last 18 months. That'll launch at the end of this month, but that's been a consistent process of going fit, structure, construction, and it's no different with boots. To really develop what we would be comfortable in marketing as a women's fit boot, women's sole plate, etc., will probably take us another 18 months to 2 years to bring to market because of the work that we're doing with our athletes. Stereotypically, women rugby players will have a wider foot, but then the profile of their foot is different to a man's, where the male's foot will sit wide at the toe box, which is where our boots are wide fitting. It will then be sort of like at the same ratio towards the heel, so they fill the back of it, whereas women's are slightly different. They do have the wide toe box, but it thins out as it gets to the heel. So there's a lot of different changes that you need to make. And, one of the USPs of our boots is that they're injury preventative. And if you look at the amount of ACL, MCL injuries happening, especially in female athletes at the minute, you've got to be pretty confident in your boot to put, this is a woman's boot that we're going to hang our hat on the same way as that we do with the males. So it is something that we're working on. But like I say, that said, we have got a great cluster of female athletes across Rugby League and Rugby Union at the minute that are wearing the footwear.
Brilliant stuff. And so we talk about the boots. Obviously, when you first got involved with Oxen kit, and that seemed really obvious, and it was linked. But then you've gone into this market with boots. We had Lockie Miller on Monday's podcast talking about how much he enjoys wearing his Oxen boot. We actually got a question about how do you get the scorch marks out of Lockie Miller's boots. He's that fast. But in terms of that going into that market space, how did that come about? And tell us a bit more about what makes an Oxen boot unique.
Yeah, boots was something that we were passionate about from the start. Is when I started at this business, we did have a distribution license for an Australian footwear brand. But around 18 months into me, working at the brand, they decided to take the brand in a different direction. That brand doesn't exist any longer. But at that point, we were very passionate about what we were doing for a couple of reasons. Is there's a massive lack of education in footwear. As clubs, we talk to players about health, nutrition, hydration, sleep. But at the minute, one thing that's lacking is footwear. And the reason that this came to prominence, and obviously dropping a little bit of a teaser here for what's to come. And I know Gareth Ellis is obviously a good friend of the club, but we worked with Gareth post his injury in 2015, which could have been a career-ending injury. He was contemplating retirement, and we worked with our background, our resource, and our science to get boots that worked for Gaz, and that kind of got him off the treatment table back onto the field after a career-threatening injury and won 2 Challenge Cups. Gaz was 33, 34 at that time, and no one had ever spoke to him about wearing an injury preventative footwear. And it's frustrating for us that we look at the amount of youngsters playing the game now and wearing the wrong footwear. And look, that's not to say that the Oxen footwear will work for 10 out of 10 athletes, but what we do need them to do is take the footwear and the foot health a little bit more seriously, because it affects the whole chain body of your system, from your Achilles to your calf to your hamstrings to your back. So the reason we got into it was because if we want to be deemed as a true head-to-toe brand within this space, then we need to offer the footwear. We had a passion for it for what we'd already done, but we felt there's a gap in the market for it as well. There's a couple of athletes not playing in Super League at the minute through injury, and it's purely, and this is me, podiatrists are saying it's because you're wearing the wrong footwear. So we realise it'll be a long game. There's not that many people that have challenged in the footwear space and been really successful in a short amount of time. But, I'm pretty young, I've got 20 years work ahead of me probably. So if it takes us a bit longer to get to where we need to get to, but by doing it the right way, then that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that two things in terms of the core of it is a protective footwear for a rugby player, and the forces that are involved in there. A lot of the high street places where parents or kids might buy their boots, they buy a football soccer boot that is a different characteristic to the rugby boot. And secondly, because I've seen you doing this, that you speak to the players as you're constructing that boot. I've seen you down at the Barcard training complex actually showing a concept for a boot and getting the players to have a training session in it, and they're immediately feeding back into. I know Ryan Hall throughout the last few years has been a great source of advice, and he's somebody who will definitely give you his honest opinion on things and things like that. And you actually go away and you change the boot based on that feedback you get, so that by the time it comes to the public buying it, it's been tried and tested and looked at and been amended in all sorts of ways, that actually you're getting something that a pro has really given the thumbs up to.
Yeah, look, 2 great points, and I think to go into them is a bit like what I said earlier, is the way we work with clubs is partner first and brand second. The footwear is athlete first and brand second. Like, as you said, we work tirelessly with the athletes to understand what can we do better. We've got great footwear as it stands now. We're not going to sit there and think that that's completed. We're constantly innovating, we're constantly tweaking. These boots have only been in the market for 18 months, but we've got a new sole plate launching next year because we realised some areas where we could add something to the stable that was missing. So yeah, it's all based on athlete feedback, not just on the aesthetics and the top, but actually the structure of it. And the point you make about the football boot is very relevant, because what we find a lot of the time is you see Premiership footballers wearing a specific style of boot, and a parent will go buy that boot for the child, or a rugby player will go buy it. 9 times out of 10, what they're wearing on the field isn't what you're buying in the store. Whereas the same injury preventative technological measures that we put into our boots, that Lockie, Brodie and Ryan wear here, is what you will buy in the store, what your son, daughter would be wearing for day in, day out training. And the reason why we're working so hard on the education and we're working with so many academies now is there's a misconception that for a boot to be injury preventative, structurally, comfortable, it has to be heavy. It doesn't. We give boots, we work with players in the first time meeting, working with a very, very high profile England Rugby League international at the minute. He's wearing our boots, and his first comment was, I didn't expect him to be that light. And it is because you've got to break down the barriers. If we talk about injury prevention and technology too much, people think it's going to be like the old style steel toe cap boots, but it's the complete opposite. Our boots rival the weight of any other boot on the market, but we do have the added benefit of the things I've alluded to.
Yeah, and you're growing the brand as well. I know you mentioned you're going to Australia. You recently announced Jerome Hughes as an ambassador over in the NRL,
yeah.
And you're working with clubs from the ground up, aren't you? Literally from the toe up. You've got involved with a couple of NRL clubs, getting their academy players learning about the importance of having the right footwear, and obviously those guys then go on to be the NRL state of origin kangaroo stars of the future.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, what we've been able to do in the NRL in a relatively short space of time is, like you mentioned Jerome Hughes there, the Dally M medal winner of the year. He's not going to put his name to something unless it's of the meticulous way he approaches the game. Everything is looked at in detail. So obviously to have him endorsing and wearing the boots is significant for us. But yeah, it's about working with them junior players as well. We have some great athletes in the NRL, but if we can educate kids at the right age, then they're going to take that throughout their career. But not only are they going to take that education throughout their career, they're going to hopefully avoid any of these lower limb injuries. So yeah, we've got partnerships with the Panthers, the Eels, the Dolphins, 3 fantastic clubs, 3 great sets of people who are willing to work with us. We go into their clubs, we talk to the juniors about the footwear, and look, we get an immense amount of sense of pride when we see them juniors come through. A great example of that would be, 2 years ago, I met Fletcher Sharp for the first time. Fletcher hadn't played a single game of NRL at the time, but, met with Fletch, met with his dad, fantastic people, brought them on board to work with Oxen. 3 weeks later, Fletch makes his debut and then scores 12 tries in 11 games the first season. And then
just because of the boots?
Yeah, just because of the boots, yeah. Well, there was a bit actually. He scored 4 tries in one game where he scored a hat-trick, and Fox Sports out there, one of them, the ball was actually going over the sideline and he managed to kick it back in to score his try. So there's just this constant focused Oxen boot, which is fantastic for us. But, they're the stories we like to tell, bringing kids through at that age, like you say, hopefully going on to see Origin players. And we kind of do the same out here. You get the athletes at the top level that the kids can aspire to. So, I can be pretty boring when I'm talking about technology and education. But as I referenced Gaz yesterday, you referenced Lockie on the podcast last week, is they will go in and they will come with me and talk to kids about, take your footwear seriously. This is why you should be. And it gives them something to aspire to. We need that credibility at the top level of these top athletes endorsing the product, but then it's about working with people from the ground up as well.
Yeah, it's great. And I see it week in, week out with my own kids playing community rugby. The amount of Oxen boots that are out there, I think it's fantastic. You can see that the message is getting home, and I think kids are seeing their rugby league stars wearing these boots, and they want to be like their rugby league stars rather than trying to emulate a football player and just wearing their boots. So fantastic. And you're involved in rugby union as well, aren't you? Some rugby union players, you've got them as ambassadors.
Yeah, we've got an amazing cluster of rugby union athletes. Probably headlined by Courtney Laws, who 17 years in the game at Northampton, won everything they could, 104 caps for England. Again, we did some great content pieces with Courtney where I wouldn't say it wasn't a hard sell, but we're taking Oxen to rugby union footwear, which was kind of uncommon at the time. But the product does the talking. The first time Courtney put it on, he rang me that afternoon and said, "Yeah, I'm in." And you look at some of the other, you have Dowie Lake, who's the Welsh captain, Theo McFarlane, who's the Samoa captain, got Calavetti, who plays at Bristol, who's had a phenomenal season, now representing Fiji, and a couple of guys down in the Australian squad as well. So actually had a British Lion run out in the Oxen boots this morning as well, which is again a great moment for us as a relatively new brand to see it being worn on the biggest rugby union stage as well. Is significant.
Fantastic, and long may it continue. Thanks, Lee, for joining us for this Q&A edition. It's been a fantastic insight. I hope you've enjoyed it. Loads of great insight into what goes into making the Leeds Rhinos kit and training wear, which we all love here at the Rhinos, but also that brilliant new initiative around footwear, something that I imagine a lot of us have never really thought about. You know, what do the players put on their feet, and how does that have a direct impact on their health and well-being, and being able to play every week and maximise their potential. Thanks for joining us. Do remember to make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast to keep in touch with all things Leeds Rhinos going forward. There's some fantastic podcasts coming out over the next few weeks. We've got the latest edition of Box 2 in partnership with Best Western GB Hotels, when we'll be hearing from former Leeds Tykes director of rugby Phil Daly about his life and times, and also you mentioned there about working with both codes. He's now the director of rugby for World Rugby, and he talks about the challenges they have and how both codes are working together to make the game as safe as possible for all participants involved in both codes of rugby going forward. So that'll be out soon. We'll also have a new edition of Knock On Effect with Jared O'Connor and Tom Nicholson-Watton coming out in the next couple of weeks, when Lockie Miller will be the guest. And you can keep in touch with all things Leeds Rhinos by making sure that you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Do leave us a 5-star review so we can continue to spread the word. We cannot wait for this Sunday's game over at Saul Group Craven Park. It's going to be a cracker against the league leaders, Hull KR. Brad Arthur and the boys looking forward to that one after the great win against Lee last week. It's going to be a fantastic game. And then we're back here a week on Friday when St Helens are in town. The women and men's team are in town to face the Rhinos. Should be a fantastic double header of action here at AMT Henley. If you've not got your ticket yet, make sure you do. It's going to be a fantastic night. Friday night rugby here at AMT. Nothing beats it. So make sure you get your tickets at tickets.therhinos.co.uk. We'll be back on Monday with our match review, where hopefully we're talking about some success over in East Yorkshire against the Robins. Until then, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.